And important information was that I was diagnosed with Alzheimer's last June at the age of 53, early onset Alzheimer's. Within a month or two after my diagnosis, I launched a blog called The Diminishing Window. And so the focus, of course, is on the window rather than the diminishing, but in any case. So that's how, and I've always been involved with writing, and this was a new kind of writing for me, but it's been well received. I seem to be getting a lot of hits on my blog, which is encouraging. But in any case, I'm just going to read the text, and maybe divert from time. But until a few years ago, Alzheimer's meant nothing to me. What I understood about the disease boiled down to this: Henry Fonda in the movie on Golden Pond, getting lost in his woods. I was a sophomore in college then, and nothing seemed more remote to me than what back then was often called senility, or more obscurely, hardening of the arteries. If there was one thing that my generation understood about aging, was that only very old people got Alzheimer's. Though maybe we should have known better. Rita Hayworth, the goddess who launched 1,000 GI fantasies during World War II, late in life became the first Hollywood star to be publicly associated with the disease. And that was late in her life. Decades later, when I started having short-term memory problems, I attributed my symptoms to nothing more than workplace burnout. After all, there was no known history of dementia in my family. My dad died just short of his 87th birthday with his mind intact, and my mom, now 88, remains lucid. My mom's dad died young in a logging accident, but both of his parents lived well into their 90s. My mom's mother lived to 79. After my diagnosis, I tried to pinpoint a culprit among my forebears, but the exercise was extremely speculative and beside the point. The result of my PET scan left only a 5% chance that the diagnosis was a mistake. My hunch is that the culprit is either 7 years of organized football in an era when subtle head trauma was not well understood, or much earlier, an accident around age 6 when I fell off the back of my brother's back fender that left me unconscious, likely for more than 10 minutes. I remember coming to in the back seat not long before I reached the doctor's office. And many decades later, it wasn't as if the disease snuck up on me. My first symptoms surfaced more than 3.5 years ago. I was driving on I-84 in Connecticut after delivering our son to his first year of college in Washington, D.C. I just turned 51, and I was in robust health. On the long drive back to Boston, I noticed a thought forming in my head that I couldn't quite grasp. It was as if I were trying to retrieve information from a hard drive manufactured in the early 1990s. That machine would sometimes emit a grinding sound when calling forth a file. What I glimpsed was a phantom of a thought, empty of meaning. Soon I started making mistakes at work. At first I attributed the cause to burnout after 8+ years in the same position. More than a year later, in December 2013, I met with a gerontologist. It was no surprise to me that my short-term memory was in decline. I'd read a few articles about mild cognitive decline, but my accent was on the mild, not the decline. Abetted by a psychologist, I anticipated that the doctor who examined me would find nothing wrong with me more than the consequences of stress and the natural aging process. And as my brother and mother could attest, I have a vaguely freakish ability to dredge up details of events from many decades ago. A useful skill for a writer of fiction, but utterly useless in the workplace. None of this, however, prepared me for what happened on that dour December day in 2013. The test I took was exceedingly brief. I was presented with a few tasks that I completed easily. Then the gerontologist gave me a series of words with the advisory that I would be asked to recall the words a short time later. I drew a complete blank. Was I alarmed? Not immediately, but then I noticed that when the gerontologist spoke, her voice was quavering. She hurriedly went through the possible scenarios. Number 1, my cognitive decline might level off. Number 2, there might be mild improvement. That was my favorite one. And number 3, I was at risk of developing dementia. Dementia? Dimension? As my crusty department head might have put it, holy crap! A few months later, I underwent a lengthy neuropsychiatric evaluation, and I walked out of the hospital that day feeling better than I had in months. While this doctor confirmed my weak short-term memory, she also knew that I was functioning at a high cognitive level. I was every bit relieved then, as I was worried 3 months earlier. That I could still be at risk of Alzheimer's conveniently slipped my mind. Another year passed. I made some marginal progress in my job performance, but overall, the downward progression continued. A month or 2 after my diagnosis last June, I read the book and then watched the movie, Still Alice, which is about Alzheimer's. What I read dismayed me. The author depicted a fictional Harvard linguist who within a mere 2 years is reduced to a state of utter helplessness. Novelists and filmmakers are under no obligation to treat medical conditions accurately or fairly, of course, but I can't help thinking of some anonymous person with mild cognitive decline being totally freaked out by the possibility of being reduced to an almost infantile state within a mere 2 years, and therefore being too afraid to be screened. My message this evening is this. Alzheimer's, at least in the earlier stages, is not as scary as you might think. Yes, as of now, there is no cure, though there is some promising research. And perhaps most important for people like me is that it is not unusual for people to live with this disease for 10 to 15 years after their diagnosis. For those of us who were diagnosed at a relatively early age, much life is still ahead of us. And if you know someone who's experiencing the early symptoms of Alzheimer's, urge that person, subtly, to be screened. Either the person will learn that they don't have much to worry about, or conversely, they'll likely be eligible for disability coverage. In my case, my disability is the pension I never would have received. And my diminishing window blog allows me to live in the moment to an extent that prior to my diagnosis would have been beyond the realm of possibility.